An activity for building the knowledge required for eventual success in reading is reading aloud to children. He identifies it as the single most important activity. I remember when I was in college, we always called that lap time. And you could tell kids that hadn't had enough lap time when it was time to start learning to read. They didn't have the same background knowledge. And so we are seeing, yes, this is true. It is decades of research have confirmed this, and teachers and probably parents have also just seen this for a long time. When we read aloud, we are doing far more than helping children learn to decode words on a page. We are building the very foundation upon which all future learning rests. A beginning reader spends an enormous amount of time learning their letters, decoding, trying to put all of those things together, blending them. What sound does this letter make? What word is this? How do I get through this sentence here? That is very important work, but it is very different than a read aloud experience. Because so much energy is put towards decoding, young readers often cannot yet access the full richness of language and the ideas that are in more advanced books. But reading aloud removes that barrier. When we read aloud, children can enjoy books that are far beyond their current independent reading level. A first or second grader may not yet be able to independently read classics like The Wind in the Willows or Heidi, but they can certainly understand and imagine and love those stories when they are being read to. I love this statement. Their ears are ready before their eyes. I think that's really cool. Their ears are ready before their eyes. So long before they can read independently, they are absorbing language through listening. They hear sentence structures that are far more sophisticated than just our everyday conversations. They encounter rich vocabulary that they rarely hear in regular casual speech. They learn how stories unfold, how ideas connect, and how language can communicate beauty and humor and suspense and truth. Jessie Wise, who is the author of First Language Lessons, reminds parents that children can understand language years beyond what they can actually read for themselves. A 7-year-old may struggle through a simple early reader or decodable independently, but yet they delight in the Chronicles of Narnia or The Wind in the Willows. Reading aloud allows children to live in a world of ideas long before they possess the mechanics to be able to enter that world on their own. This matters because comprehension almost always precedes expression. They have to have the input before we can expect the output. And that's really one of the main tenets of classical education is the input. That's why we do all of the memory work, all of those things, because we want to give them the input before we expect that output. Children cannot write thoughts that they have never heard. And I think in today's world, we think, oh, you can be anything, you can do anything, right? But really, we have to give them what they can be. They cannot speak with richness if they have never been surrounded by rich language. The words we pour into them today become the words that are available for them to use tomorrow. Reading aloud also develops something that our modern culture often overlooks, which is imagination. If you think about it, our children are exposed to a lot of screens. And when things are on screens, every detail has already been chosen for them. If they're watching a movie, they already see what the castle looks like. The dragon is already the color that the artist chose it to be. But when children hear a story read aloud, they get to be the active participant. Something remarkable is happening because they get to imagine the setting or picture the characters or imagine hearing their voices or their accents. They get to build that world for themselves instead of someone just handing it to them. This is one of the reasons why classical education treasures the great books, because they invite children not simply to consume entertainment, but to become active participants in creating meaning. And as they experience and encounter beautiful writing, their own thinking becomes more expressive and more creative. Rich language gives children richer thoughts. Reading aloud also teaches children something that is increasingly rare in our distracted age, which is sustained attention. For 20 or 30 minutes or however long you are reading to them, they practice following one idea or one narrative. They learn patience as the story develops. They have to wait for it to unfold rather than getting that instant gratification. They have to invest in an entire chapter to see what happens, not just a 30-second YouTube short. In an age of constant notifications and endless scrolling, reading aloud trains our children to have focused attention. And that is not just a reading skill, but it's a life skill. Of course, strong readers generally become stronger students. So we could say we read aloud because it's going to make our kids smarter, right? And we want our kids to be the smartest. But reading aloud does far more than that. It does contribute to larger vocabularies, improved comprehension, stronger writing, greater academic achievement. But researchers have shown that the benefits of extensive exposure to language accumulates over time. And children who read and are read to continue building knowledge and vocabulary at an accelerating pace, while those with limited exposure often fall further and further behind. But this is not the ultimate goal, right? We're not just looking for that high level of academics. It's not simply preparation for the SAT because I read all these great books with really good vocabulary and now I can do great on my test. It's actually preparation for a richer life because every page we read enlarges our children's capacity to think clearly and to communicate beautifully, to understand deeply, and to delight in learning. As remarkable as all of those cognitive benefits are, those are only the beginning because stories do more than just grow the mind. They also shape the heart.
We're going to take turns. We're going to go back and forth. So I'm going to start talking about how it shapes the heart, how it forms the person. And I'm going to first begin with who better to form the person than you, mom and dad. This is the job that God has given you, and your school is here to partner with you in that endeavor. You're primary, but not solitary. And so we see Read Aloud as a wonderful way to build relationship. One of my favorite books about reading books is Honey for a Child's Heart. And I would highly recommend, if that is a new book to you, to get your hands on a copy. But in it, Gladys Hunt has this beautiful section where she talks about, as parents, how we need to give our children both milk and honey. So milk symbolizes those substantive, I'm not saying that word right, those important things like, you need to learn your phonograms, you need to eat your vegetables, you have to drink your milk because your bones need it. But then honey are these sweet moments that we as parents get to drip into their lives, and we need to sweeten their lives. So that has been my kind of parenting paradigm. I'm trying to make sure that I'm giving them both milk and honey. And so I asked my sister, who I think is a very talented watercolorist, to capture that in a picture for me. So she painted this for me years ago, for me just to keep in front of myself that my job is both milk and honey. And in it, in Honey for a Child's Heart, they say good books are rich in honey. So as you are enjoying these good books together, as you are the ones reading these good, virtuous stories to your children, you are building relationships with them. I remember once leaving I think I was going to a conference or something, and I was going to leave my husband home with 3 very little children, one of whom has always struggled to regulate his emotions. And I remember telling him, if it gets messy, just start reading aloud. They will sit and they will come to you. And that's what happened in our home. Like I say, I had this one kiddo in particular. He couldn't regulate his emotions, and then our whole family couldn't regulate our emotions because we were all responding to him. And there was something about us reading to him, hearing that language has a very regulating effect, not only for this one particular child in our family, but for all of our family. And so some of our best memories have been formed over the books we've read together. Like my little bio said, no one in our family, we all have different opinions about what our favorite book is, like our favorite read aloud. You can form relationships over your favorite authors. My mom's favorite author and illustrator was Tommy DePola. I knew this about her all of my life growing up. I think I got to go meet him once when he was in Austin, and he signed a book for me. And I remember these being on our bookshelves growing up. And so you can imagine how thrilled I was to find these two side by side at my half-price books. And I gobbled them up. And so now they're at Jimmy's house, and my kids see them at Jimmy's house, and they're at my house. And we read them together at my house. Same thing with my grandmother. who was an English teacher, believe it or not. But when I would go visit her over the summer, we would take trips to her library, and I got to check books out with her at her library. And there was this copy of Little Women that sat back in my dad's bedroom, and it just kind of looked at me every time I would come. And it was a really long read, but it was this beautiful book. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to read that someday. And I did accidentally, I took it once, and I had to call her later and say, Mama, I'm sorry, I think I stole a book from you. I took your copy of Little Women. And of course, very generously, she said, oh, keep it. And so it's in my home now. But you form relationships over your favorite authors. You also get to start forming inside jokes. Any of you ever read the Mercy Watson series? Okay, if you haven't, you've got to read it. It's an excellent opportunity for voices. And in my house, if we tell you, stop being a Eugenia Lincoln, you know what that means. You're being grouchy and mean, and you need to knock it off. If you're a General March Mouse, this is from the Tum Tum and Nutmeg series. If I call you a General March Mouse, you're being a little cavalier and not being very careful with your actions, and you need to pay a little bit more attention about it. It's kind of cool how we can read about these characters, and there's no need to lecture. If I say stop being a Eugenia Lincoln, everybody knows what that means, and I don't have to say anything more. Just 2 nights ago, I was having a conversation with a certain middle daughter who was acting like one of the characters in the book we're reading right now. And I was able to say, hey, you're acting more like Vincent than you are Georgia. And her face, she immediately knew what that meant. And she knew that Georgia was the more virtuous character and that she needed to stop acting like Vincent and try to act a little bit more like Georgia. My youngest sister did not get the tall gene. I have it, my next sister has it, and then Emma's right on down here. And my mom got this book for her when she was in in early elementary school after she came home and someone had teased her for being short, and it really, really hurt her heart. My mom found this book, Stand Tall, Molly Lou Mellon. Molly Lou Mellon is teeny tiny in this book, but she goes and she does all of these amazing things. So of course, this book is at our home as well, and we've read this together. And this book follows that pattern of the repetitive language. Ronald Durkin is the bully in the story, and he is very foolish. And I have a video of my little bitty son saying, Ronald Durkin is very foolish. And we know we don't want to be like Ronald Durkin. We want to stand tall like Molly Lou Mellon. Stories have an amazing way to help you build a relationship as you're forming this little person. The business of Paideia requires relationship, and coming together over a good book is an excellent tool. And that's the next kind of thing to talk about, is that good books help form the person. So Charlotte Mason is one of my favorite educators to learn from. She was a British educator and philosopher during the late 19th and early centuries. And she's got 6 volumes on home education, what her philosophy of education. She's got a lot of good work out there. But she emphasizes that all children are born persons, and that a child's mind is no mere sack to hold ideas, but is rather a spiritual organism with an appetite for all knowledge. And she really encourages parents to come alongside and to, she says, set their feet in a wide room, present for them all the things of life. When it comes to the role of a teacher or a parent, there is no education, Charlotte says, but self-education. And as soon as a young child begins his education, he does so as a student. Our business as teachers and parents is to give him mind stuff, and both quality and quantity are essential. I know there's that kind of challenge out there between quality time and quantity time. And of course, we would all prefer quality time, but I think a lot is accomplished through quantity time, just lots of time together. And you're going to get that back here in this model. And so let's use it well. In her philosophy of education, she says of students, but they want a great quantity of the sort of food. Let me start that one again. But they want a great quantity of the sort of food whose whole issue is conduct. And that is why poetry, history, romance, geography, travel, biography, science, and sums must all be pressed into service. No one can tell what particular morsel a child will select for his sustenance. One small boy of 8 may come down late because I was meditating upon Play-Doh and couldn't fasten my buttons. That has yet to happen in my house, but maybe. But another may find his meat in Peter Pan. But all children must read widely and know what they have read for the nourishment of their complex nature. So it's the idea of a charcuterie board. When you're building a charcuterie board, you put lots of options on there as you're inviting your guest over because you don't know necessarily who's going to want the prosciutto or who's going to want the pepperoni or who's going to choose the olives or the nuts, or you might sprinkle a little bit of chocolate in there too. You're inviting many people and everyone's going to find their sustenance on what you've provided. This is what we're offering to our children when we read to them a wide variety. God has made them to be someone very specific, and your job as parent and co-teacher is to give them lots of these words from many different types of authors. I know in our house, we have a, reading at bedtime routine, and my husband always plans to read 2 old books and then 1 new book. And he's trying to do lots of different genres, not knowing what it is in any one of these books that might strike our children and be important to their formation. Karen Glass, who also writes about Charlotte Mason, says this: everything that a person learns becomes a part of himself. And as his character is formed, he recognizes that he is made up of those experiences he has had, the people he has met, the books he has read, and the things he has thought. This is also where that oral narration can be really helpful. As you're reading to your students, having them reproduce in their own words what was read is a way for them to internalize all those little details and those experiences from the book that you just gave to them. Just last week, we had all of our family and faculty training. We had our Paideia conference, and our head of school, Cameron, got up and led us through an exercise in which he talked about Bloom's taxonomy. Are any of you familiar with this? Okay, so I remember this, of course, from my teacher at college and then my first few years, or my 1 year in a public school. And I remember being terrified of it because this is what I was evaluated on. And I taught 4th grade, which would be considered grammar stage. And so a lot of what we were doing were these 2 lower tiers, understanding and remembering. We were talking about a lot of facts. We were investing in a lot of stories. But you were considered an excellent teacher if you were up at the very top. And that's where our goal was always to be, that the kids were going to either be evaluating or creating something. And so I remember honestly struggling with Bloom's for a little while. But last week, Cameron presented it to us, and he reminded us that especially in the grammar stage, and especially through the books we read our kids, the experiences that we offer them, and the conversations we have, we are filling up those lower 2 levels. They are remembering and understanding more and more things of the world, which having a solid base of this pyramid is what is, bless you, what is going to allow them to then one day apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Now, that doesn't mean to say that your grammar stage student can never move into those higher levels of Bloom's. They absolutely will, especially if you've got a kid who studies something on his own and has already filled up those bottom bases. But Cameron is helping me to repair my relationship with Bloom's taxonomy. And the last week, as I've had conversations with my 3 children, and as we've read together, I just have in my mind, I'm filling their storehouses. As we talk about words, as I define words that are new to them, as we, read something together, I am filling their storehouses of remembering and understanding so they can go on to those higher levels of thoughts, and they can be formed to be a more complete human. Last thing I'll say, like I said, Charlotte talks about setting students' feet in a wide room that's filled with these experiences and details. And I remember my very last year in the 4th grade classroom for Veritas. 4th grade is the end of our grammar school, and they move on to the School of Logic the next year. And I remember talking to my class and saying, we're at a really cool point where you guys are about to go be School of Logic students. And I told them, I said, I feel like all year long, in your entire grammar school career, your teachers have just given you these little pearls of knowledge or wisdom. And what's about to start happening is you're starting to make these connections. It happened for us at the tail end of fourth grade. Some of our curriculum, our Latin and our grammar started to line up. And I could say, what we're doing now is we're taking those pearls of knowledge and wisdom that you've been given, those experiences, the books you've read, understanding and remembering, and we're going to start stringing them together to form a pearl bracelet or necklace. I'm sure the girls appreciated it. The boys may not have liked that metaphor. But that's what our job is when we read to students. That's one of the jobs. One of the ways that we can form them as these little humans is we're filling their storehouses with these experiences and details so that they will become men and women of virtue, which is what Amanda's going to share with next.
So reading aloud, Hannah's taller than me. Reading aloud is really important for virtue and biblical worldview formation. We know that classical Christian education has always understood that education is about much more than just filling the minds with information, but it is actually about forming and ordering the loves. James K.A. Smith says that we are shaped most deeply, not merely by what we know, but by what we love. Before we are thinkers, we are worshipers. Our hearts are always being drawn towards something. Stories help us participate in that formation. When children rejoice as Aslan sacrifices himself for Edmund, they begin to recognize and love sacrificial courage. When they cheer for Wilbur's unlikely friendship with Charlotte, they learn that friendship is worth it, even when it's costly. When they laugh with Pooh or lament over Toad from Wind in the Willow's foolishness, they are not merely observing virtue, they are learning to delight in it. So a lecture can tell a child that courage is important, but a story can allow a child to experience courage. We know that virtue is caught before it is explained. We have been born in God's image, we are imitators, and we know that children in particular will naturally imitate things, whether it's good or bad. We see this a lot, though, with kids. They pretend to be a knight, and they march through the backyard with a stick, acting like it's a sword, right? Because stories give them heroes. They read about knights, or they hear about knights, and then they want to become it. The heroes that we place before our children become the kinds of people and containing the virtues that they long to become. So that's why choosing a good story really matters. Do you want them to be emulating Junie B. Jones? Or do you want them to emulate Laura from Little House on the Prairie? Every character is not perfect, far from it. But sometimes, well, all the time, great stories ultimately will point towards truth. Pooh Bear is not always prudent. Heidi is not always obedient. Pinocchio certainly makes poor choices. But through the examples, and oftentimes more so through the non-examples, the children begin to recognize the virtues. They recognize the wisdom and the folly and the courage and the cowardice of these characters. And virtue becomes something that they can see and understand before they understand the definition of it. Reading aloud also creates a safe place for children to wrestle with difficult questions. Questions like, why did that character do that? Was it wise? Was it loving? What happened because of that? Would you have done the same thing? Was that biblical? Right? These conversations help teach our children discernment long before they actually have to face these situations in real life. So it's one of those low-cost things, right? They can kind of imagine making that choice and the consequences that would follow, but they don't actually have to do it themselves, which is great. Instead of simply memorizing the definitions of prudence or justice, they begin to recognize those virtues lived out or neglected in the lives of others. So reading aloud books that contain virtue teaches children to look beneath just surface level behavior and start thinking about what is happening in the heart. Eventually, hopefully, they start thinking about that in themselves as well. Like, it's not just, I hit my brother and that was a poor choice, but what was going on in my heart that made me think that hitting my brother was okay. As Christians, we know that every truly good story ultimately echoes the one greater story. Again and again, in really good classical books, we encounter familiar themes that we might have seen in another book, including the weak overcoming impossible odds, sacrifice bringing life, light defeating darkness, the lost being found, a king returning to make all things right. These stories resonate with us because they reflect the deepest reality of the universe. God himself chose to reveal his redemption through a story, a true story stretching from creation to fall and redemption and restoration. Every beautiful story whispers echoes of that greater narrative. When our children grow up immersed in these stories that celebrate truth and goodness and beauty and sacrifice and forgiveness and hope, they are developing categories that help them recognize the gospel in the world around them. They are learning not only to know what is true, but they are learning to love it.
All right, so now we want to just share some tips with you about how you can go about accomplishing this in your house. Because this is not something that really happens all that naturally. Maybe when your children are very, very small and they're really drawn to books and they bring them to you over and over again. But I've noticed as my kids have grown older, we've had to be more intentional to ensure that we're not just, we've always done our school reading, but that reading aloud as a family or even in individual, pairs, we've had to be intentional. And so I would encourage you to just start making this a habit. Just start with something. I remember one summer, I just decided every day at 1:00, we will go to the porch and we will read. And that's what we did. So find a place in your house and you just say, when it is this time, we go here and we start reading. Do what you can to build a little bit of awe around some of your books. We've done this in our home, not in our current home, but a couple of homes ago, we had this little corner of our kitchen where we put a really low bookshelf, and that's where all of our special books lived. I'd bought several illustrated classics, really beautifully illustrated books that just lived there, and there was a little chair where they could go sit and they could just read through these stories on their own, and we just made that kind of a special part of the kitchen. There have also been summers where at 10 o'clock we go outside with a picnic on a blanket and mom reads for 30 minutes out loud, then you each read for 10 to 15 minutes on your own, and I also take my book and I'm also reading during that independent time. I'm modeling that for them. Schedule it, whether it's bedtime, having a summer or weekend schedule. This changes as your kids will change, but schedule it and build a place and just build a habit around reading out loud. In Honey for a Child's Heart, Gladys Hunt says, influencing our children is not a casual task. It won't get done unless we have a plan. And I can tell you that when I haven't had a plan, these things haven't happened. And I've caught myself and realized, it's been a long time since we enjoyed a book together. I need to make a new plan for that. I would also encourage you to incorporate movement and activity. I have 2 boys. They have to move a lot, and so we've done a lot of reading. I think our very first chapter book read aloud was of the Moffats, and we read most of it on a big spider swing outside that we all 4 fit on together. So I'd push us on the swing while we read. I've read to boys while they're jumping on the trampoline. I know there are some teachers who feel worried about, should I let them draw while I read? What if they're not paying attention to the story? They absolutely are. If you're choosing good books, they're going to be paying attention. So whether they're drawing, whether they're doing puzzles, if they're doing little tangrams, coloring books, painting, whatever that may be, sometimes giving their hands a little bit of movement actually frees up their mind to really absorb the story. So incorporate some sort of movement. If you've got little bitties and you're reading those picture books, I remember there being times where the words felt too much to enjoy the book, and so I just would, read as many of the words as the kiddos gave me permission to do, and then when we were done with listening to the words, we stopped and we just talked about the picture. Wordless picture books, that took me a long time to figure out what to do with those. I thought I was supposed to magically create a story, which is great if you're a wonderful storyteller, but I also realized, we just get to enjoy the beautiful illustration and talk about the details and the things we see and ask questions. So whatever that looks like for you with your toddler. If it's reading every word and they're hanging on every word, I have a niece who has every book, it seems, memorized. Then some of my boys, we just had to sit and enjoy the picture. Any of that being in the book, you're building the habit and it's worthwhile. I'd encourage you to start investing in like storybook treasuries. Half Price Books is a really great place for all of that. Great bang for your buck. And then you'll find your favorite stories in there and just keep reading them. It's actually like I just cleaned out our bookshelves, and a bunch of our treasuries they're all taped up because they've been loved too much and they've been destroyed, and they're all taped up, which I also kind of love. And then I would definitely encourage you to find time in your homeschool spaces for audiobooks. I remember one summer I wasn't ready for my kids to be on any sort of a device. Did you know you can still buy Walkmans, like DJ Discmans? Those still exist. Each kid got one. You can still, from many libraries, check out like stories on CD. It was the cutest thing. That summer, they each had this little tent that was set up in our playroom, and they'd go in there for their quiet time. They'd go into their tent with their little Discman and their headphones on, and we listened to a lot of Mercy Watson that summer, and they would just put their CDs in, and they learned to care for their CDs. And my daughter then immediately started talking like the characters in Mercy Watson, which was good and bad. But stories on CD. It's nice to not have to have a device out in front of them, and your library has them. So those are some of my tips. Amanda has some too.
So one thing that worked for my kids a lot was food. They liked having read aloud with a little snack. One night we had finished dinner, and my husband said something about, he remembered and he loved The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So I was like, oh, great, because normally read aloud was just between me and the kids because Dad was at work. But I was like, would you like to read that aloud? And he was kind of like, I don't know. But I was like, you can take a turn. And so we did. We took turns reading aloud to the kids. And the very first night we read it, like we were making a big deal of it, like Dad gets to be here for read aloud. So we popped a bag of microwave popcorn. And from then on, they were like, it's time for read aloud. You want me to make the popcorn? They were just all in for the popcorn. They did love this story too. And we still have lots of inside jokes about old Tom. I would also say, let me see where it was. Oh, we love having celebrations when we finish our book. So it could be as simple as watching the movie that goes along with the book. That has been really fun because they're picturing it as they're reading. They're working on that active comprehension. And then you put the movie in front of them, and usually they hate it. They're like, that was nothing like what I thought it was. And I'm like, yes, right? Because then it teaches them to love reading more. But it's also just great for conversation because you can say, well, what did they do differently that maybe you didn't prefer? Or was there one thing in the movie that you thought was good, I know, on how they changed it. So it just is a good conversation opener there. Also, you could do like a family experience. So Basil E. Frankweiler is a book that y'all are going to be reading as a school. It's actually called From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. We just call it Basil E. Frankweiler. But that story is set in an art museum. So when we finished that book as a read aloud, we found an art museum to go visit. And then we would stop and we would talk and we would say, do you think this is how the boy and girl in the book felt? And really just tried to make that connection. And it was a day, and we took a picnic, and it was just a fun way to wrap up the story. If you have read Charlotte's Web, then go to, maybe there's a county fair in town, or the San Antonio Livestock Show. Go see the animals, right? See the pigs. Talk about, do you think Wilbur was that big? Or, can you look for a spider? Do you think there's a spider in the corner? Is it Charlotte? And just really make that connection between the book that you just read as a family and real life. Because anytime you can connect text to life, text to self, even text to another book, you're just solidifying that knowledge. And so it's a really great experience. So thinking about selecting good books, as I said, as a school, y'all will be doing From the Mixed Up Files of Basil E. Frankweiler, and you will get a packet on exactly how you're doing it at home. It will tell you what chapter you're reading. It will list out for you a script of how you are going through different copywork, narration, and dictation. It's something that we do at Veritas, and y'all are going to do it here. But we chose books that contained virtue, that had characters that we would want our children to emulate, maybe sometimes characters that made mistakes that offered good teaching moments. And so when you are reading a book, other than the one that the school has chosen for you, when you are just out on your own looking for a book, you need to think about, do I want my kids to emulate these characters? Is it obvious in the book who is good and who is bad? Because society today is doing this fun little bait and switch where they make the bad guy look like the good guy, right? And it's very confusing to children. They need to know right and wrong. They need to know this is a good person, this is a bad person. And so make sure that you are choosing books that have clear definition of that for your kids, because we don't want to introduce confusion for them. As I said earlier with Junie B. Jones, I don't know if you've ever heard Junie B. Jones. When I was teaching first grade in public school, Junie B. Jones was all the rage, and that child is a mess. She is all kinds of trouble, and she speaks very poorly. And I noticed, well, all the first grade teachers were reading the book. And so I got it too because I was trying to do what they were doing. And I noticed when I was reading the book that all of my kids started being sassy. And I'm like, what is going on? This is not how Mrs. Hurley runs her classroom. And one little girl finally said, I'm just acting like Junie B. And I was like, oh, Junie B is out of here. She's expelled. And so I would much rather put someone like Laura from Little House on the Prairie, right? Because you want characters that your students would like to imitate. Think about, will this book be useful in our endeavor to grow wisdom and virtue? Think about those virtues of fortitude and prudence and charity, all of those things, and try to identify in those books, where am I seeing this? And how can I point that out to my student? And as you are reading with them, stop. When you notice something is happening, when Pooh is not being prudent, stop and say, oh my goodness, what do you think about what Pooh Bear just did? And name it. Tell them that he was not being prudent, and talk about what is prudence. Put it in front of them. Ask yourself, does this book point us towards goodness and truth and beauty? If you are reading Captain Underpants to your student, I can promise you it's not pointing them towards goodness and truth and beauty. It might be funny. It might be what all the other kids are reading, but it's not going to do the job that you want it to do. It's going to be entertainment, but it's not going to be formational. And then also, like I said, bringing back to Junie B., does this book contain language that I would want my students to then produce? Because again, we are made to be imitators. And so if it is put in front of them, you better believe they're going to say it, especially if they think it's a little bit over what you would allow, right? Because they're just imitating the character. I mean, what's wrong with that? There are many good lists of books. There are many places where you can find books. And I think Hannah has a list for that.
Perfect. Thanks. Y'all are doing so great. Yes, my daughter has dyslexia, so reading has not been easy for her. So she has listened to hours and hours and hours of audiobooks. And my daughter does not look at things, she peers at them. And I can just know she picked that up somewhere in a story. Okay, some helpful resources for you guys. Y'all can take maybe a picture of this, but I'm going to go through these really quickly. Up at the top is a website, Redeemed Reader. I think they also have a little newsletter, but they will do independent reviews of specific books. And so if there's a book that your kiddo maybe brings home from a friend's house or picks up at the local library and you're just wondering about it, you can check Redeemed Reader. They also formulate book lists. And so if you're looking for something, that's a good place to start. Honey for a Child's Heart, I recommended that to you. That one also, she's got all kinds of book lists in the very back, broken down by age, maybe even by gender and by subject. The Read Aloud Family. So Sarah McKenzie wrote The Read Aloud Family after reading Jim Trelease's book. She also has a podcast called The Read Aloud Revival, and she's just a delight to listen to. She's got a great website. Her website is also filled with book lists. And so, if you guys are in the ancient world next year in history, you can go on there and find picture books about the ancient world. And it's really cool when what they're learning in your history lesson at home and at school matches the books that are all of a sudden right next to the couch, and they can sit and enjoy those. And then the Sarah Clarkson also has Read for the Heart. So there's other things out there. These are just some of the ones that we are aware of that we wanted to make you aware of so y'all can choose good books to read. And with that, let me pray. Is that okay? Okay. Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity to come and meet these wonderful parents and these wonderful teachers and just have another friend in the classical world and in the university model world. Lord, I just ask that you would bless all of their time as they are preparing for the beginning of their school year. as these families are going home and just thinking about their families and who they want their children to become, Lord, I pray that you would speak to each of these parents individually and in unity in marriages, Lord, that they would know who these young men and women are, that they are growing, and that, Lord, you would provide for them their next step, and that they would feel confident and know that in parenting, Lord, all they need to do is to be obedient unto you, and that, Holy Spirit, you would be so near to them, guiding them in all of the decisions, big and small. Lord, we love you, and we thank you that we don't do any of this alone, but that you do go before us. And we celebrate your son, Jesus. Amen. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Y'all drive safely home. Thank you. Thank you guys for sitting for another day. I know it's been a long day and a long day of just sitting. Just a couple of announcements. Tomorrow we have just a half a day of sitting and learning, and then the second half of the day is to meet your teachers and to have an ice cream social out on the playground. So we're excited about that. Miss Lindsay, did you want to tell them something about the football tickets?
Who's ready for football?